Soon I will fall asleep and I will wake from this terrible dream. The endless night will fall and I will rise." That's a line from some old book my uncle made me read. I never understood it until that night. Now, years later, the words echo in my mind when the sun goes down. They're a constant reminder that for some of us there is no waking up. The December night at Red Creek Timber and Chemical wasn't an end. It was a beginning. It peeled back the skin of the world and showed me the bone and gristle underneath. And it left me with scars, the kind that don't bleed but ache with every full moon, whispering that the dream is my reality now. My Uncle Rick always said I had the sense. Not in a see the future kind of way, but a deeper, more primal intuition. A built-in alarm that screams when you're about to step on a snake in the tall grass. He's the one who got me into all of it. The dusty books on cryptozoology, the late-night documentaries on alien abductions, the binder full of newspaper clippings about things that go bump in the night. "The world is older and stranger than they tell you, Leo," he'd say, tapping a yellowed photo of something blurry in the woods. "The trick isn't to find the monsters. It's to know when to turn around and walk away." That one skill had kept me safe my whole life, until Ethan came to us with a map. It was late December, that dead week between Christmas and New Year's when time itself seems to go on vacation. The four of us were crammed into Ethan's basement, the air thick with the smell of old pizza boxes. He spread a brittle yellowed blueprint across the coffee table. It was the layout for the old Red Creek Timber and Chemical plant. "My grandpa was an engineer there right before it shut down in the 80s, Ethan said, his voice buzzing with the kind of infectious excitement only he could muster. He was always the charismatic one, the leader of our little group. The company was going under and fast. He told my dad he stashed his life savings, bonds, cash, some gold coins, in the director's office safe. He was going to come back for it, but he shrugged. He had a heart attack a week later. Never got the chance." I leaned closer, tracing the faded blue lines with my finger. Administrative building, processing plant, chemical storage. It was massive. "So you're saying there's a treasure map? An X marks the spot in some forgotten factory?" "Exactly." Mason slapped the table, rattling the empty soda cans. Mason was all action. Zero hesitation. If you told him to jump off a bridge, he'd ask, "Which one?" on the way down. Only Caleb looked uneasy. His real name was Caleb Jensen, but we all just called him Caleb. He was picking at a loose thread on his hoodie. "An abandoned chemical plant in the middle of nowhere? Doesn't that sound, I don't know, a little dangerous?" "That's the point, man," Mason shot back. "It's an adventure." I should have listened to the quiet hum of my internal alarm. Uncle Rick's voice was a faint whisper in my head. Know when to turn around. But the lure was too strong. A real-life ghost story, a forgotten industrial titan, a hidden treasure. It was a chapter straight out of one of my uncle's books. How could I say no? The drive out there was a descent into another world. We took Mason's beat-up Ford Bronco, its engine groaning in protest as we left the suburbs behind. The highway gave way to a two-lane county road, and that eventually dissolved into an old, unpaved logging trail. The asphalt was a distant memory. For the last 10 miles, the only road signs were the towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks that pressed in on us, their massive trunks forming a dark, endless colonnade. The air grew cold and damp, the last vestiges of daylight swallowed by the dense Oregon canopy. Cell service had vanished an hour ago. We were utterly, completely alone. "Are you sure this is it?" Caleb asked, his face pale in the gloom of the dashboard lights. Grandpa's directions were specific, Ethan said, his eyes fixed on the muddy track ahead. It should be just past this bend. We rounded the corner, and the trees finally broke. There it was. Silhouetted against the bruised purple sky were the smokestacks of Red Creek timber and chemical. They rose like skeletal fingers clawing at the clouds. The factory was a sleeping, rust-colored beast sprawled across a clearing in the heart of the forest. The sight of it didn't feel like an adventure. It felt like a warning. The silence was the first thing that hit you. It wasn't a peaceful, backcountry quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of a silence, the kind that makes the sound of your own heartbeat feel like a drum. Mason killed the engine, and the world went still. The Red Creek plant loomed before us, a sprawling complex of decaying brick and corrugated metal, its windows like 1,000 vacant eyes. A 10-foot-tall chain-link fence, crowned with coils of rusted barbed wire, separated us from the grounds. A faded sign hung crookedly from the gate, its letters peeling, Red Creek Timber and Chemical, private property, no trespassing. The rust had eaten away half the words, leaving behind a jagged brown stain that looked unsettlingly like dried blood. "Well, it's not exactly rolling out the welcome mat," Caleb muttered, his breath fogging in the cold air. "That's what makes it fun," Mason said, already out of the Bronco and testing the fence. He found a spot where the bottom had been bent upwards, leaving a gap just big enough to squeeze through. He went first, followed by a reluctant Caleb, then Ethan. I came last, pausing to scan the perimeter. Nothing but trees and shadows. The parking lot was a graveyard of cracked asphalt, with weeds and even small saplings pushing their way through the fissures. It was vast, easily 100 yards to the main administrative building. I unzipped my backpack. Figured we might need these. I pulled out 4 heavy-duty flashlights, the kind my uncle insisted were essential for any field research. I'd checked the batteries twice before we left. I handed one to each of them, keeping one for myself. "All right, here's the plan," Ethan said, pointing his flashlight beam at the 2-story brick building that dominated the complex. "The director's office is on the 2nd floor corner suite. Mason and I will take the main entrance. Leo, you and Caleb circle around back, see if there's another way in. We'll meet up inside." My internal alarm was humming louder now, a low-frequency dread in my gut. Splitting up was rule number 1 in every horror movie I'd ever seen. But Ethan was already moving, his confidence pulling Mason along in his wake. Caleb and I started our slow trek around the side of the building. Our boots crunched on loose gravel, the sound echoing unnaturally in the dead air. The wall was a long, monotonous stretch of dark brick, punctuated by a row of large, grime-streaked windows on the 2nd floor. Most were intact, but a few were shattered, leaving jagged black voids. "This place gives me the creeps, Leo," Caleb whispered, his flashlight beam trembling. "It feels watched." "It's just an old factory," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. That's when he stopped dead, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. His grip was like a vice. "Leo, look." He pointed his light at the far end of the building, 2nd floor. In the black rectangle of a broken window, something had caught the light. It wasn't a reflection. It was 2 points of light, side by side. A dull phosphorescent yellow, like a cat's eyes. But there was no head, no body. Just the 2 glowing orbs hanging in the darkness. They were utterly still. "What is that?" I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't know." We took a hesitant step forward. The gravel crunched under my boot, Instantly, the eyes swiveled, locking onto us. There was an intelligence there, a predatory focus that turned my blood to ice. Without a word, we both dropped, hitting the damp, cold ground and flattening ourselves in the overgrown weeds. My face was pressed into the dirt, the smell of decay filling my nostrils. I held my breath, listening. Silence. After what felt like an eternity, I risked a glance. The window was empty. The eyes were gone. "Did you see that?" Caleb's voice was a choked whisper. "They moved. They looked right at us." "I saw," I said, my own voice shaky. I pushed myself up, my knees trembling. Whatever it was, it's gone now. We stood there for a moment, two statues in the oppressive dark, our flashlight beams cutting nervous holes in the night. The feeling of being watched hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified, as if the entire factory was now holding its breath, waiting. That's when a sound shattered the silence from the front of the building. A sharp, explosive crash of shattering glass. The sound of breaking glass acted like a starter pistol. Caleb and I bolted, our earlier caution vaporized by a fresh surge of adrenaline. We rounded the corner of the building at a dead sprint, our flashlight beams bouncing wildly off the brickwork. We found Mason standing by the main entrance, breathing heavily, a fist-sized rock in his hand. The window panel next to the heavy steel door was a spider web of cracks around a gaping hole. "What was that for?" I panted, skidding to a halt. "Doors chained from the inside and padlocked," Mason said, gesturing with the rock. This was quicker. Ethan was already reaching through the hole, fumbling with the chain on the other side. "I almost have it. There." A heavy clatter echoed from within as the chain fell away. He pushed the door open, revealing a wall of absolute darkness. The four of us stood at the threshold, peering into the black maw of the factory. The air that flowed out was stale and cold, carrying a faint, acrid tang that stung the back of my throat, layered over the damp scent of mold and decay. It smelled like a tomb. "Okay, we're in," Ethan said, his voice a little too loud in the sudden quiet. He stepped inside, and one by one we followed, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive gloom. We were in a small, tiled lobby. A dusty reception desk sat like a lonely island in the center, and behind it a hallway stretched into darkness. The silence inside was different, thicker, more profound. Every scuff of a boot, every breath seemed to be amplified, then swallowed by the vast, empty spaces beyond. "All right, stick to the plan," Ethan insisted, his voice regaining its command. "Grandpa's office was on the second floor. That's where the safe is. Mason, you're with me." He pointed his flashlight down the main hallway. "Leo, you and Caleb check out the ground floor. That door probably leads to the main processing plant. See what you can find. We'll use the walkies. Channel 3. I pulled the two-way radios from my bag. They were cheap, but they'd always worked before. I handed one to Ethan. "Check in every 10 minutes, I said, the words feeling strangely formal, like something from a movie. "Got it," Ethan replied, already turning to go. "Let's move." I watched them disappear down the hall, their flashlight beams shrinking until they were just two dancing fireflies that vanished around a corner. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The image of those yellow eyes in the window was burned into my mind. Splitting up now felt less like a plan and more like a fatal error. "You okay?" Caleb's voice was quiet beside me. "Yeah." "Let's just get this over with," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. I pushed open a heavy double door marked "Processing Floor." The space that opened up before us was cavernous. The ceiling was lost in shadows 30 or 40 feet above our heads, a tangled web of pipes and girders. The beams of our flashlights could only illuminate small portions of the immense room at a time, revealing monolithic shapes that resolved into silent, hulking machines as we drew closer. Conveyor belts snaked through the darkness like dormant rivers of rubber. Giant steel vats, some as large as small swimming pools, stood in rows, their surfaces coated in a thick layer of dust and rust. The scale of it was dizzying. It felt like we were walking through the fossilized ribcage of some colossal metallic beast. Our footsteps echoed, creating phantom companions that seemed to follow us through the gloom. A steady plink, plink, plink. From somewhere in the darkness provided a maddening metronomic beat to our exploration. We walked deeper into the iron heart of the factory. The air grew colder. We passed a bank of enormous industrial grinders, their jagged metal teeth frozen in a silent snarl. It was here that Caleb stopped, his light fixed on a dark stain on the concrete floor near the base of one of the machines. "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you think that is?" "Oil, probably," I said, not wanting to consider the alternative. He didn't seem convinced. He lowered his flashlight, turning to face me. The beam illuminated the worried lines on his face, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond the simple creepiness of an abandoned place. "Leo, why are we really here?" The question hung in the dead air, more chilling than any sound. "What do you mean?" "For the treasure, Ethan's grandpa's stash." "Does that really make sense to you?" he pressed. "Hiding a fortune in a place like this? A place that was being shut down, liquidated? Why not a bank? Why not bury it? Why here?" He was right. The story, which had seemed like a thrilling adventure back in the warmth of Ethan's basement, now felt thin and full of holes. Why here? A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a dread that had nothing to do with ghosts or darkness. It was the feeling that we had walked willingly into a trap we didn't understand. I keyed the walkie-talkie. "Ethan, you there? Come in." Only static answered, a harsh, crackling hiss. "Ethan? Mason?" I tried again, my voice rising. "This is Leo. Do you copy?" The static sputtered, then died, replaced by a profound silence. The walkie was dead. At that exact moment, from somewhere high above us, from the direction of the second floor, a scream ripped through the factory. It was a wet, tearing sound of pure agony, unmistakably Mason's voice. And it was cut short by a guttural, canine snarl that was not human at all. For a second that stretched into an eternity, we were frozen. Mason's scream still hung in the air, a ragged echo in the cavernous space. The inhuman snarl that had cut it off was still ringing in my ears. The world had tilted on its axis. This was no longer an adventure. It was a hunt, and we were the prey. "We have to go," I choked out, the words catching in my throat. My body finally obeyed my brain, and I grabbed Caleb's arm, pulling him toward the only exit we knew, the double doors leading back to the lobby. "What was that? Oh my God, what was that?" Caleb stammered, his feet stumbling as he tried to keep up. "I don't know, but we're not staying to find out," I hissed, shoving him ahead of me. We burst back into the main hallway, our flashlights frantically scanning the darkness. The corridor leading to the stairs was a black tunnel. The silence had returned, but now it was charged with menace, a predator's stillness before the pounce. Every shadow seemed to writhe with potential threats. "The stairs," I whispered, pointing. "We have to see what happened. We have to find Ethan." It was a stupid, reckless idea, born of shock and a desperate, fading hope that we'd misunderstood what we'd heard. We crept down the hallway, our backs pressed against the cold, tiled wall. The air grew perceptibly colder as we neared the stairwell, as if we were approaching the door of a walk-in freezer. At the base of the concrete stairs, a single, dark shape lay on the landing. It was Mason's flashlight, its beam pointing uselessly at the ceiling, casting a weak, circular glow. A few feet from it, a dark, wet smear stained the concrete. My blood ran cold. I raised my own flashlight, sweeping its beam up the stairs, and that's when I saw it. It was standing on the second-floor landing, partially obscured by the railing, looking down at us. It was not a man, and it was not a beast, but some hellish fusion of the two. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and disturbingly gaunt, its pale gray skin stretched so tightly over its frame that every rib and vertebra was visible. Its limbs were unnaturally long and thin, ending in hands that were more like blackened talons. But the head was the epicenter of the nightmare. It was the elongated, snarling snout of a wolf, its lips peeled back to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Its eyes glowed with that same dull, sickly yellow we had seen in the window. They were eyes filled with a terrifying ancient intelligence and a bottomless hunger. It wasn't a werewolf from the movies, all muscle and fur. This was something older, something starved and wrong. It let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through the concrete and began to descend the stairs, its movements a fluid, horrifying scuttle. Its claws made a sharp, scraping sound on the steps. Click, click, click. Panic, pure and absolute, finally broke my paralysis. "Run!" I screamed, shoving Caleb back toward the processing floor. We scrambled back through the double doors, slamming them shut behind us, though we knew it wouldn't hold the creature for long. We ran blindly into the labyrinth of machinery, our flashlight beams slashing through the darkness. The thing's terrifying clicks grew louder, closer. It was impossibly fast. "In here!" I yelled, spotting a small, boxy structure built against the far wall. It was a dispatcher's office, a small room with a heavy-looking steel door and a window made of thick, wire mesh-reinforced glass. We threw ourselves inside, and I slammed the heavy door shut, fumbling with the deadbolt. It slid home with a solid, definitive thunk, just as something impossibly heavy slammed into the other side. The entire steel frame shuddered. A furious, bestial snarl echoed through the metal, followed by the screech of claws raking down the door. We backed away, pressing ourselves against the far wall, our chests heaving. Through the grimy, reinforced window, we could see its silhouette pacing back and forth, its long, spindly form a study in predatory rage. It stopped, its yellow eyes locking onto us through the glass. It raised a clawed hand and tapped on the window, a gesture so unnervingly deliberate it made the hair on my arms stand up. Tap, tap, tap. Then it turned its head as if listening to something and loped off into the darkness of the factory floor. We held our breath, straining to hear. A moment later, the creature reappeared, but it wasn't alone. It was dragging something behind it, a limp, unresisting form. It was Mason, or what was left of him. The creature dragged his body past our window and into the shadows. Caleb let out a strangled sob, clapping a hand over his mouth. My own stomach churned with a mixture of terror and nausea. We were trapped. We were in a cage, and the zookeepers were monsters. A second figure emerged from the shadows to join the first. It was slightly smaller, but built from the same nightmarish blueprint. Gaunt frame, pale skin, lupine head. It nosed at Mason's body before the two of them began to feed. The sounds, the wet tearing, the cracking of bone, were the most horrific things I had ever heard. It was then I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that we hadn't stumbled upon a lone monster. We had broken into a nest. We had walked into the larder of a whole pack. The sounds from the factory floor were a symphony of horror that seemed to go on for an eternity. Caleb had crumpled into a corner of the small office, his body shaking uncontrollably, his head buried in his hands as he tried to block out the grisly noises. I couldn't look away. I was transfixed by the scene outside our grimy window, my mind struggling to process the grotesque reality of it. The two creatures finished their gruesome meal, leaving behind a dark, motionless heap in the shadows. They weren't sloppy. They were efficient, their movements practiced. This was not their first hunt. One of them, the larger one we'd seen on the stairs, the alpha my mind supplied, lifted its wolfish head and stared directly at our little sanctuary. It took a step toward us, and I flinched, but then it paused. It tilted its head, a strangely canine gesture of curiosity, before turning and melting back into the darkness with its companion. The immediate threat was gone, but the terror remained, thick and cloying in the tiny room. We were trapped in a metal box in the heart of a monster's den. Ethan was still somewhere on the second floor. Was he hiding? Or was he gone, like Mason? The thought was a spike of ice in my gut. We have to do something, I whispered, my voice hoarse. My eyes darted around the small office, searching for anything. A weapon, an escape route, a miracle. The room was Spartan. A single metal desk, a rusted chair, and a bank of dead control panels against one wall. It was a prison. My flashlight beam fell upon the desk. Amidst the thick layer of dust was a hardcover logbook, its green cover faded and stained. With trembling hands, I picked it up and opened it. The last entries were from October 19th, 83, the final weeks before the plant closed for good. The handwriting, a neat cursive at the beginning of the month, became a frantic, almost illegible scrawl by the end. The writer was a shift foreman named Abe Raskin. October 12th, another one gone. Miller from the debarking line just didn't show for his shift. Police say he probably just skipped town, tired of the layoff notices. I know better. That makes 3 this month. It's the full moon again. The old-timers say it's the land. Cursed. October 19th. The new engineer started today. A Mr. Hayes. Strange man. Doesn't say much, just watches. There's something about his eyes. A hunger in them. The director thinks he's here to help with the liquidation. But he spends all his time out by the chemical vats. Doesn't feel right. October 26th. God help us. Saw it last night near the perimeter fence. It was taking a deer. The way it moved, it's not an animal. It's a devil from the woods. I tried to tell the director, but he laughed at me. He trusts Hayes. He says Hayes has assured him the company's fortunes are about to turn around, that he's brokered a new pact for prosperity. A pact with what? What lives in these woods? My blood turned to ice. Hayes. The name hit me like a physical blow. I scrambled to remember the snippets of conversation, the stories Ethan had told us. "What was your grandpa's name again?" I asked Caleb, my voice urgent. Caleb looked up, his face a mess of tears and fear. "What? I don't know. Ethan just called him Grandpa." But I knew. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying speed. The treasure. The paranoid grandfather who hid his life savings. The new engineer with the hungry eyes. The pact. It wasn't a story about lost treasure. It was a story about a deal, a deal with the devil, paid for in blood. Ethan hadn't led us here to find a fortune. He had led us here to be the payment. His family wasn't the victim of this place. They were its keepers. They were the ones who fed the monsters. We weren't adventurers. We were sacrifices. A faint scraping sound from the other side of the steel door made me jump. Not the furious scratching of claws this time, but a metallic rhythmic sound. The sound of a key sliding into a lock. With a loud click, the deadbolt slid open. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was Ethan. He was perfectly calm, completely unharmed. His clothes weren't even dirty. He looked at us, his face unreadable in the gloom, but his eyes were as cold and empty as a winter sky. He hadn't come to save us. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The pack is hungry." Behind him, in the darkness of the factory floor, yellow eyes began to light up, one pair after another. 2, 4, 6 of them. They were all there, emerging from the shadows, a silent, starving jury ready to pass judgment. "Ethan, what did you do?" The words were a choked whisper torn from my throat. My mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and horror. This wasn't my friend. The person standing in the doorway was a stranger, a shepherd leading his sheep to the slaughter. Ethan took a step into the room, his expression unchanging. "It's a simple transaction, Leo. It always has been. My family gets prosperity, protection. The guardians of this place get their due, a tribute." "Tribute?" Caleb sobbed from the corner. "You're feeding us to them. Mason!" "Mason served his purpose," Ethan said, the words as cold and sharp as glass. "This place was built on a pact. The first owner made a deal with the thing that lives in this forest. My grandfather simply renegotiated the terms when the company was failing. He bound our family to the pact in exchange for wealth beyond measure. But the contract has clauses. It requires periodic payment, blood for gold." Behind him, the pack began to stir. The Alpha, the huge one from the stairs, stepped forward, its lupine head low, a guttural growl rumbling deep in its chest. Its yellow eyes were fixed on us, burning with malevolent intelligence. The others fanned out, their gaunt, skeletal forms creating a terrifying, semicircular wall, blocking any hope of escape. "Why us, Ethan?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage and fear. "We were your friends." A flicker of something. Was it regret? Passed through his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. It had to be someone. The hunger grows. If the debt isn't paid, the curse turns inward. It would have taken my family next. It's just business. The Alpha took another step, its claws clicking on the concrete. The smell of damp earth and something wild and musky filled the small office. The creature was an abomination, a mockery of life, and it was going to tear us apart while our friend watched. In that moment of pure, undiluted terror, my mind did the only thing it could. It fled to my Uncle Rick. I saw his cluttered study, the shelves overflowing with books, the diagrams of wards and symbols tacked to the wall. I heard his voice calm and academic from a dozen late-night conversations. "All legends have a kernel of truth, Leo. Lycanthropes, skinwalkers, whatever you call them, they have weaknesses, ancient rules they must obey. Silver is the most famous for a reason. It burns them. It purifies." My eyes darted around the room, a desperate final search. The desk, the chair, the control panels. Nothing. It was hopeless. The Alpha creature was coiling its long limbs, preparing to spring. Then I saw it. In the corner, half hidden behind a rusted metal locker, was a shattered wooden crate. Its contents, a cascade of whitish-gray crystals, had spilled onto the floor. A faded stencil on the side of the crate was barely legible in my trembling flashlight beam, but I could make out 2 words: silver nitrate, a chemical plant. Of course, silver nitrate, Agneo-3, used in everything from photography to chemical synthesis. It wasn't a silver bullet or a blessed cross, but it was silver. A caustic, crystalline form of it. It was a chance, a 1 in a million chance. The pack surged forward. 2 of the smaller creatures lunged for Caleb, their movements a horrifying blur. He screamed, a high, thin sound that was abruptly cut off. I didn't have time to watch. I didn't have time to mourn. As the massive alpha beast lunged directly at me, its jaws snapping open to reveal a wet black maw of needle-like teeth, I acted on pure instinct. I dove for the corner, scooping up 2 handfuls of the sharp crystalline powder. I spun around just as it was upon me. I threw the silver nitrate with all my strength, aiming directly for its face. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The moment the crystals touched its wet snout and eyes, the creature shrieked, a sound of unimaginable agony that was neither wolf nor man. It was the sound of a soul being seared. Sizzling smoke erupted from its head as the caustic silver burned into its flesh. It thrashed wildly, clawing at its own face, its terrifying yellow eyes now smoking, ruined pits. The other creatures, startled by the alpha's unholy screaming, fell back for a precious second. The pack was in disarray. It was the only opening I would get. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted over the desk and bolted out the open door, leaving the chaos and the cacophony of monstrous pain behind me. I ran. I ran past the silent, hulking machines and the dark, empty vats. I ran for the lobby, for the broken window, for the cold night air that meant freedom. Behind me, the alpha's screams of agony subsided, replaced by a chorus of furious, enraged howls. The hunt was on again, and this time it was personal. I burst out of the main building through the shattered window, a spray of glass skittering across the asphalt. The cold night air was a shock to my lungs, sharp and clean after the stale decay of the factory. For a heartbeat, I thought I was free. Then the howling erupted from the factory behind me, a multi-toned cry of pure rage and hunger that echoed through the silent forest. They were coming. My first instinct was the Bronco. I sprinted across the cracked parking lot, my feet pounding on the asphalt, my breath tearing at my throat. I didn't dare look back. I could hear them, the impossibly fast scrabbling of their claws on the pavement, getting closer. I reached the spot where we had parked. The Bronco was there, but it was a wreck. The tires were slashed, the windows smashed in, and the driver's side door was bent and twisted, ripped nearly off its hinges as if by a giant can opener. There was no escape. They had planned for this. They had herded us here and made sure there was no way out. Panic threatened to swallow me whole. I was trapped between a pack of monsters and 100 square miles of dark, unfamiliar woods. The woods. It was my only choice. I veered away from the ruined truck and plunged into the tree line, leaving the relative open of the factory grounds behind. The forest floor was a treacherous carpet of slick pine needles, moss-covered rocks, and tangled roots that seemed to grab at my ankles. Branches whipped at my face, stinging my skin. The darkness here was absolute, a thick, palpable blackness that my flashlight beams struggled to pierce. The sounds of the chase were all around me now. The snapping of twigs to my left, a guttural snarl to my right. They were flanking me, herding me, playing with me. They knew this forest. This was their territory, their hunting ground. I was just a terrified animal, running blindly through their domain. My lungs were on fire. My legs burned with lactic acid. Every muscle screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. To stop was to die. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and went down hard, my flashlight flying from my grasp and extinguishing as it hit a tree. Plunged into total darkness, I lay there, gasping for air, the smell of damp earth filling my senses. This was it. This was the end. I could hear them closing in, the soft padding of their feet, their low, predatory growls. I scrambled backwards, my hands searching the ground for a rock, a branch, anything. My fingers closed around something solid. It was my flashlight. I fumbled with the switch. Nothing. I shook it frantically, my knuckles rapping against the metal casing. With a flicker, the beam came back to life, weak and sputtering, but it was light. I pointed it forward, and my heart stopped. Standing not 20 feet from me was the Alpha. Its face was a horrific mess of charred flesh and burned-out eye sockets, smoke still curling faintly from the wounds. But it could still smell me. It could still hear the frantic pounding of my heart. It took a slow, deliberate step toward me, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It was savoring this moment. Then, behind it, another figure appeared. It wasn't one of the creatures. It was Ethan. He walked past the blinded Alpha, his face grim. "You should have just accepted it, Leo," he said, his voice quiet. "It would have been quicker." "Why?" I managed to gasp out. "The pact has been broken," he said, a strange, hollow look in his eyes. "You hurt the Alpha. You defied the terms. Now the debt is void, and the curse, it settles." As he spoke, a horrifying transformation began. His shoulders broadened, his spine elongating with a series of sickening cracks. His face stretched, his jaw pushing forward into a snout. Pale fur sprouted from his skin, and his clothes ripped and fell away as his body contorted into the same nightmarish form as the others. The last shred of humanity vanished from his eyes, replaced by that same hungry yellow glow. He was one of them. He had always been one of them. The newly transformed Ethan let out a piercing howl, a call to the hunt. But in that moment, as the pack began to converge, I saw my chance. They were focused on me, on the kill. The road, the logging trail we drove in on, couldn't be more than a few hundred yards away. I didn't wait for another invitation. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not deeper into the woods but parallel to it, pushing my body past every limit I thought I had. The howls behind me were a symphony of damnation, but I didn't look back. I just ran, fueled by the last desperate embers of hope. I don't remember breaking through the last of the trees. I just remember the shocking feeling of gravel under my sneakers instead of soft earth, and the wide open sky above me. I had reached the logging trail. I stumbled into the middle of it and collapsed, my body finally giving out. I lay there, gasping, waiting for the claws and teeth that I knew were coming. But they never came. I risked to look back and saw nothing but the dark, silent wall of the Oregon forest. It was as if the trees themselves had formed a barrier they could not cross. The pact, whatever it was, had bound them to that land. I was found at dawn by a trucker hauling lumber. I was a raving, mud-caked mess, and he probably thought I was on drugs, but he let me use his phone. I made one call, to my Uncle Rick. I expected disbelief, questions, maybe even a call to the authorities. Instead, his voice was grim and weary, laced with a sadness that sounded ancient. "I always worried this day would come, Leo," he'd said. Our family, we're not like other people. We have it in the sense for a reason. We're watchers. We're meant to know where the shadows are deep and to stay away. I'm so sorry I didn't prepare you better." He didn't ask for proof. He believed every word. He met me in a town 2 counties over and helped me disappear. A new name, a new state, a life spent looking over my shoulder. The official story was a tragic hiking accident. 4 boys went into the woods. Only one came out too traumatized to speak of what happened. The case went cold. But I know the truth. I know that deep in the Oregon woods, a rusted factory stands as a monument to a devil's bargain. I know that Ethan and his family are still there. No longer keepers of the pact, but prisoners of it. Their humanity, a distant memory. The evil wasn't defeated. It's just contained, waiting. I never really left Red Creek. It lives behind my eyes. And on nights when the moon is full and bright, I feel a strange, cold pull eastward. I don't sleep. I just lie awake and listen to the faint phantom sound of a rusted echo on the wind, a reminder of the endless night that fell, and the part of me that rose to meet it. I never woke from the dream, I just learned to live inside of it. Story 2. The wood of this porch is silvered with age, worn smooth by seasons I never thought I'd live to see. I sit here, 1,000 miles and a lifetime away from Arkansas, and watch the November woods of Oregon prepare for winter. The trees are different here, Douglas fir and cedar, not the oaks and hickories of my youth, but the cold is the same. It's a clean, sharp cold that carries the scent of pine and damp earth. It's nothing like the cold of that other November. That cold was dirty, heavy with the weight of things that shouldn't be. People love their campfire stories. They talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some gentle, misunderstood giant hiding in the deep woods. They make TV shows, sell blurry photos, and go on weekend expeditions hoping to catch a glimpse of a myth. They don't understand. They don't want to. What we saw in Devil's Hollow wasn't a myth, and it certainly wasn't gentle. It wasn't some missing link ape. It was older than that. It was something born of shadow and rage, something that walked on 2 legs but was not, and had never been, human. It was intelligent, but its intelligence was a weapon, honed by an ancient and unending malice. The real horror isn't in the seeing. It's in the knowing. It's in the carrying of that knowledge, a cold, heavy stone in your gut for the rest of your days. You can move 1,000 miles away. You can change your life. You can pretend the memory is just a nightmare that's faded with the dawn. But it never really fades. It's always there, waiting in the quiet moments. How do you go on living a normal life, a good life, when you know for a fact that such things are real? How do you ever feel safe again? When you know a shadow like that walks the earth, and it has seen your face. November in the Ozarks has a special kind of bleakness. It's not the picturesque melancholy of a New England autumn. It's a raw, stripped-down emptiness. The sky hangs low and heavy, the color of wet concrete. The vibrant reds and golds of October are gone, replaced by a uniform, skeletal brown. The trees are bare, their branches like black veins against the gray canvas, and a damp chill seeps through your clothes and settles deep in your bones. It's a landscape that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for the first real snow to cover its sins. That was the mood in 2012. I was 19, and the world felt as small and suffocating as our town. We were trapped in that post-high school limbo, too old for teenage mischief, but too broke and directionless for anything else. That night, the 4 of us were crammed into Caleb's beat-up Chevy Silverado, the heater blasting recycled air that did little to fight off the cold. there was me, Leo, Caleb at the wheel, Finn, whose real name was Finley, crammed in the middle, and Maya by the passenger window. "I'm going to die of boredom," Finn announced, his voice muffled by the collar of his jacket. "My ghost will haunt this very truck, eternally asking if we're there yet." Caleb chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. He was a local through and through, born and raised in these hills. He knew every back road, every fishing hole, and every story that came with them. "Relax, Finn. I've got an idea. Something to shake the dust off." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a glint in his eye. "You guys ever been up to Devil's Hollow?" I hadn't. The name alone was enough to make you think twice. "My grandpa used to talk about it," Maya said softly, her voice barely audible over the engine's drone. She was always the quiet one, the observer. "Said it was a bad place?" "It's just an old logging road that peters out," Caleb said, waving a hand dismissively. "But there's a story. They call the local boogeyman the Ridge Runner. Legend says it's some kind of spirit that guards the woods. Back in the Prohibition days, the moonshiners started the rumor to keep the feds from snooping around their stills. Said it would tear a man apart for trespassing." "A Ridge Runner? Seriously?" Finn snorted. "What's it do? Jog menacingly at you? Maybe hand you a cursed bottle of water?" "Laugh it up," Caleb said, a grin playing on his lips as he turned the wheel, the truck lurching onto a less-traveled county road. The pavement was cracked and uneven. "They say it's big, hairy, and has eyes that glow in the dark. A classic, right? The perfect story to tell your kids to keep them out of the woods at night. Or to keep 4 bored idiots from driving up a creepy road in the middle of nowhere," Maya murmured, pulling her jacket tighter around her. She was staring out the window, but I knew she wasn't looking at the passing trees. She was looking at the darkness between them, the deep, impenetrable black that swallowed the headlight beams just a few feet from the road. I followed her gaze and felt a prickle of unease. Out here, the scattered farmhouse lights were gone. There was only the narrow tunnel of our headlights and the oppressive weight of the forest on either side. The skeletal branches of the oaks and hickories seemed to claw at the edges of the light, eager to pull us into the shadows. Caleb kept talking, his voice a confident, easygoing drone, but the legend hung in the air, no longer just a story, but a possibility seeping in through the truck's rattling frame. The turnoff was almost invisible, a narrow gap in the wall of trees that you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Caleb swung the Silverado onto the dirt path, and the world changed instantly. The worn asphalt was gone, replaced by a rutted track carpeted in a thick, damp layer of fallen leaves. The truck's suspension groaned in protest as we jolted and swayed, the tires crunching over the decaying foliage. Our headlights sliced through the absolute black, illuminating a corridor of pale, ghostly sycamores and massive, gnarled oaks. Their branches tangled overhead, forming a natural, claustrophobic tunnel. It felt less like we were driving and more like we were being swallowed. "See? Nothing to it," Caleb said, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. He was trying to project confidence, but the oppressive atmosphere was getting to him too. "Yeah, this is great," Finn said, his usual sarcasm now laced with a nervous edge. "My idea of a good time is definitely a 4-wheel drive colonoscopy." No one laughed. The only sounds were the complaining engine and the soft, wet crush of leaves under our wheels. We drove for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. The road twisted deeper into the hollow, descending slightly. Then the trees on the right fell away and we emerged into a small, unnatural clearing. and there it was. A house. It stood about 50 yards from the road, a skeletal silhouette against the slightly paler dark of the sky. It was a simple, 2-story farmhouse, the kind you see in old photographs, but time had been cruel to it. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine. The porch tilted at a drunken angle. The windows were gaping black squares, empty sockets in a skull. It looked like it had been abandoned mid-breath, left to the mercy of the woods, which were slowly creeping back in to reclaim the land. To the side of the house, half swallowed by weeds and shadows, sat the rusted-out shell of an old Ford Falcon, its paint peeled away to reveal a body of leprous brown metal. "Whoa!" I breathed. "Told you it was something," Caleb said, killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. There were no crickets, no rustling of night creatures in the underbrush, no whisper of wind through the bare branches. It was a dead, absolute quiet that pressed in on your eardrums. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. "Last I heard, no one's lived here since the 80s, Caleb continued, his voice now a respectful near whisper. "Family just up and left, or so the story goes." "Let's get out," Finn suggested, already reaching for the door handle. "I need a cigarette. My nerves are shot." "I don't know, guys," Maya started, her eyes fixed on the house. "This place, it feels wrong. Can we just go?" "We just got here," Caleb countered, trying to sound reasonable. "We'll have one smoke, enjoy the creepy vibes, and then we'll bail. What's the harm?" The harm, I thought, was in that silence. It was in the way the house seemed to watch us from its black, empty eyes. But I didn't say anything. I was 19 and trying to be cool. We piled out of the truck, the cold hitting us immediately. I zipped up my jacket, my breath pluming in the frigid air. We crunched across the yard, the frozen grass snapping under our feet, and leaned against the cold, smooth metal of the abandoned Falcon. The car felt ancient and solid beneath my hands. Finn flicked his lighter, the small flame a defiant spark in the vast darkness. He lit his cigarette, then passed the lighter to me. As the flame flared near my face, I glanced at the house. For a split second, in the shifting light, I could have sworn I saw something move in one of the upstairs windows. A flicker of motion. But when I looked again, there was only blackness. It was just a trick of the light. It had to be. We stood there for a few minutes, huddled together by the derelict Ford, a small island of nervous energy in an ocean of suffocating quiet. The smoke from our cigarettes curled up in lazy gray tendrils, briefly visible before being swallowed by the darkness. Finn was trying to crack jokes, but they fell flat, absorbed by the silence, before they could even land. Maya stood slightly apart, her arms crossed tightly, her gaze darting between the dark tree line and the gaping maw of the house's front door. Caleb was trying to act nonchalant, one boot propped on the Falcon's rusted bumper, but he kept glancing over his shoulder. The cold was getting deeper, a biting, invasive chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was about halfway through my cigarette, the tiny ember a comforting point of light in my hand. I was focused on it, on the simple act of drawing in smoke and letting it out, when Caleb made a sound, a sharp, guttural hiss. "Shh!" The command was so sudden, so sharp with genuine alarm, that we all froze instantly. Finn's next attempt at a joke died on his lips. My hand holding the cigarette stopped halfway to my mouth. My first thought was that someone was in the house. The owner. A squatter. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat in the dead quiet. I was ready to bolt, to sprint back to the Silverado and leave a cloud of dust and gravel in our wake. This was it. We were busted. But Caleb wasn't looking at the house. He was staring intently into the solid wall of darkness to the left of it, where the woods pressed right up against the edge of the clearing. He raised a trembling hand and pointed. "What?" Finn whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't see anything." At first, I didn't either. It was just a deeper patch of blackness, the place where the shadows of the ancient oaks were thickest. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of the shapes. It's a trick of the dark, I told myself. It's just paranoia. But then I saw it. It wasn't that something had stepped out of the shadows. It was that a piece of the shadow itself had detached and taken form. It was darker than the night, a void in the shape of a man, but not a man. It was tall, impossibly tall. It had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. A towering pillar of blackness that seemed to drink the faint starlight from the sky. It stood on 2 long, powerfully built legs, but it was hunched slightly, not like an old man, but like a predator coiled to spring. Its body was covered in what looked like thick, matted hair or fur, coarse and shaggy. The silhouette was wrong, the proportions distorted and monstrous. The arms were too long, ending in what I could only perceive as large, heavy hands. And then Finn, in a spasm of nervous terror, fumbled with his lighter. He clicked it, and for a single, heart-stopping second, a tiny flame bloomed in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The flame caught 2 points of light within the creature's head. They weren't reflections. They were burning with their own internal luminescence, a sick, predatory yellow. The light gave a fleeting, nightmarish impression of a face, not an ape, not a bear, but something horribly in between. The head was elongated, the snout distinctly canine like a wolf's, but twisted into a form that could stand upright. It was a werewolf from a fever dream, caught in a state of unholy transformation. We were paralyzed. Every rational thought evaporated, replaced by a primal, lizard-brain terror that screamed one word: wrong. This thing was fundamentally, existentially wrong. It did not belong in our world. We were standing no more than 15 feet from it, close enough to see the way its chest rose and fell with silent, steady breaths. It wasn't just an animal. The way it stood, the way it watched us with those intelligent, malevolent eyes, it was studying us, sizing us up. And in that terrifying, frozen moment, I knew with absolute certainty that we were its prey. The creature didn't roar. A roar would have been a mercy, a familiar sound from a nature documentary. What it did was infinitely worse. A sound began to emanate from its deep chest, a low, guttural vibration that I felt more than heard. It was a growl that resonated in my bones, in the fillings in my teeth, a subsonic thrum of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting deep within the earth, a promise of violent annihilation. For a split second that stretched into an eternity, we remained locked in that tableau of horror. 4 terrified teenagers and the abomination from the woods. Then it moved. There was no warning, no tensing of muscles. One moment it was perfectly still, a statue of solidified nightmare. The next it exploded into motion, launching from a dead standstill into a full, ground-eating sprint directly at us. The speed was unnatural, a blur of matted black fur and pumping limbs that defied physics. The spell of paralysis broke. Primal terror took over, a jolt of pure adrenaline that bypassed thought and went straight to action.
Car!
I screamed, the word tearing from my throat as I spun and scrambled away from the falcon. We all moved at once, a chaotic, desperate surge of bodies. Finn stumbled, catching himself on the frozen ground. Maya let out a choked, terrified sob. We were a herd of panicked deer, and the wolf was upon us. We crashed into Caleb's Silverado, fumbling madly for the door handles. My fingers felt like clumsy, frozen sausages. I wrenched my door open and threw myself inside, not even bothering to get my legs in before I was yelling, "Go, Caleb, go!" The truck roared to life. Caleb didn't need telling. He slammed the gear shift into reverse, his face a pale mask of terror in the faint glow of the dashboard. The tires spun, screaming against the frozen dirt and leaves, struggling for purchase. Finn tumbled into the back seat beside me, pulling his door shut just as the truck lurched backward. Maya was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure panic. Caleb twisted the wheel, the truck slewing sideways, and stomped on the gas. We shot forward, fishtailing wildly as we careened back toward the dirt road. The headlights swept across the clearing and my blood ran cold. The creature was still coming. It was gaining on us. Its long, powerful strides ate up the ground with terrifying ease. It was a dark missile locked onto our bumper. I watched, mesmerized with horror, through the back window as we sped away. It was almost on us. It was running straight for the abandoned Ford Falcon, the very car we had been leaning against moments before. It was directly in its path. It's going to have to go around it, I thought, a desperate, fleeting spark of hope. That will slow it down. It didn't go around it. In a display of impossible fluid power, the creature didn't even break stride. As it reached the rusted car, it launched itself into the air. It was not a jump, it was a flight. It sailed effortlessly over the roof of the Falcon, a perfect dark arc against the pale night sky. For one horrifying, unforgettable moment, its silhouette was framed perfectly. The long limbs, the hunched, powerful shoulders, the canine head. It landed on the other side with a silent, cat-like grace and continued its sprint, not having lost a single step. I was petrified, literally unable to move or breathe. That image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids, the sheer, effortless, unnatural power of it. This wasn't just a monster. This was something that broke the rules of reality itself. We hit the dirt road, the truck bucking and jolting violently, but Caleb didn't slow down. He drove with a frantic, desperate focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes locked on the narrow tunnel of light ahead. No one looked back again. We didn't need to. We could all still feel it behind us, a relentless, hateful presence pacing us in the dark. We didn't stop. Caleb drove like a man possessed, his foot welded to the accelerator. The Silverado bounced and skidded on the dirt track, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers. When we finally hit the blessed, solid asphalt of the county road, the tires chirped in protest, but he didn't let up. Miles of dark highway flew by in a blur. The rhythmic thump-thump of the road reflectors was the only sound besides our ragged, panicked breathing. No one spoke. There were no words for what we had seen. What could you possibly say? We didn't slow down until the first streetlights of town appeared, casting a sickly orange glow that had never looked so beautiful, so safe. Caleb drove straight to his apartment, a small second-floor unit in a dingy complex on the edge of town. He parked the truck haphazardly, taking up 2 spots, and we all but fell out of the cab, our legs shaky and weak. Inside, under the sterile buzz of the fluorescent kitchen light, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a frantic, hysterical energy. What was that? What in God's name was that? Maya whispered, hugging herself as she paced back and forth across the worn linoleum. Her face was ashen. "It was a bear," Finn said, his voice high and strained. He was trying to convince himself as much as us. "A big, messed-up black bear. Mange or something. It stood up, that's all." "A bear?" I shot back, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "Did you see it jump? A bear that can jump over a car, Finn? A bear that's 8 feet tall and has a head like a wolf?" "I don't know what I saw," he yelled, his composure finally cracking. "It was dark. It was a trick of the light, it had to be." Caleb was silent. He had slumped into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. The confident, cocksure local who knew all the stories was gone. In his place was a terrified kid who had come face to face with the reality behind the folklore. He looked up, his eyes wide and haunted. "It wasn't a bear," he said, his voice raspy. "The stories, they're real. The Ridge Runner, it's real." We argued in circles for hours, fueled by cheap coffee and terror. Denial fought against the horrifying certainty of our shared memory. By the time the first watery gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, we were exhausted. No closer to an explanation that wouldn't make us sound insane. We went outside, drawn by a morbid need for proof. The sun was up, but the sky was still overcast, casting a flat, unforgiving light on everything. We walked to Caleb's truck, and we found it. There on the rear passenger side quarter panel, just above the wheel well, were 3 deep, parallel gouges. They were scraped clean through the red paint and the primer, down to the gleaming raw silver of the steel. They were perfectly spaced, the kind of marks that could only have been made by something with immense strength and massive claws as it swiped at the fleeing vehicle. I knelt, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. I ran a trembling finger along the edge of one of the scratches. The metal was curled back, sharp as a razor. And then I saw it. Wedged deep into the lowest gouge was a small tuft of coarse black hair. I carefully worked it free with my fingernail. It was stiff, almost like wire, and it carried a faint, foul odor, a mix of wet dog, damp earth, and something else. Something coppery and metallic like old dried blood. We all stared at it, lying there in the palm of my hand. This was not a trick of the light. This was not a shared hallucination. This was physical proof. It was real. The silence that fell between us then was different from the silence in the hollow. This was the silence of a terrible, shared knowledge. The monster was real, and it had left its mark. Our friendship didn't survive that night. It didn't end in a big fight or a dramatic falling out. It just eroded. That shared knowledge became a wall between us. How do you talk about homework or weekend plans when you've all seen the same impossible, terrifying truth? Every time we looked at each other, we saw a reflection of that horror in their eyes. We were bound together by a secret we could never share, and a memory we could never escape. Within a year, we had all drifted apart, moving to different cities, different states, chasing a fragile sense of normalcy. I was the only one who couldn't let it go. I spent years in college library archives and online newspaper databases, obsessively digging. I searched for animal attacks, missing persons, and unexplained phenomena in that specific county in the Ozarks. I found more than I wanted to. A hiker who vanished without a trace in the 90s. A string of livestock mutilations in 2005, blamed by local authorities on a pack of feral dogs. A brief, 2-sentence article from 1983 about the Miller family abandoning their farm on Devil's Hollow Road, citing only personal reasons. The same family whose name, I discovered, was still on the deed to that derelict property. And that's when the final, coldest piece of the puzzle clicked into place. We hadn't just trespassed on some monster's hunting ground. That house, that clearing, it wasn't just an abandoned ruin. It was a lair. It was its home. We had pulled into its driveway, stood on its front lawn, and smoked cigarettes while leaning on its car. We hadn't just stumbled upon a beast in the woods. We had knocked on its front door. That's the thought that keeps me awake now, all these years later, 1,000 miles away. The thought that it wasn't just some mindless beast. An animal might forget. But a resident, a creature with a territory, a home, it doesn't forget intruders. It remembers. And as I sit here on my porch, watching the shadows lengthen in these unfamiliar woods, I can't shake the chilling certainty that it remembers me. It remembers all of us. And it knows what we look like.